Today we are going to explain the concepts discussed in Carbon Democracy by Timothy Mitchell. Democracy is a system of government in which entire eligible population has a vote in legislation. We have seen democracy shift from power and shape definitions many times throughout history. Carbon democracy, what is it? In its simplest terms, carbon democracy is the form of politics that emerged from arguments connecting fossil fuels, finance, and political power. Society found ways to utilize fossil fuels to improve efficiency and quality of life. Two fossil fuels, coal and oil, affected democracy by creating mass democracy and exposing its limits. Here we define democracy not based on voting, but rather on people being able to make decisions to shape the course of events or to actively participate in decision-making in Western Europe. Carbon production allows the workers to empower themselves to make their voices heard, a concept referred to as carbon democracy. Alright, so to know why coal and oil control democracy, we must know how they're extracted and transported. First of all, this was the first time in history that coal was the single source of energy that powered the world. Its enormous importance developed as coal dominated energy production across the world. Coal miners extracted coal by digging holes in the earth for mine entrances, a very labor-intensive task. They worked together in dark, hot, cramped areas where management is nowhere nearby. Having a concentration of workers at strategic points throughout the industrialization of coal provided the opportunity for workers to easily communicate their shared complaints and begin unionizing for their own rights. However, conveniently, coal runs along fairly narrow supply routes. It comes from certain places underground, the mines, and then it's moved by rail and by water to the places where it's used, such as power stations and industry sites in large cities. What that meant is that not only were countries dependent on a single source of energy, but a source of energy that is vulnerable to disruption because those routes have certain key points where the flow can be interrupted. For example, the mines, the docks where the coal is loaded onto barges or ships, and the power stations where the coal is used. Coal is transported via trains and railways that are geographically dependent on where the railway could be placed. Workers could easily strike and physically block railways and the transportation of coal, effectively leaving regions without a source of energy. The result of that was that for the first time in history, it was possible for workers to shut down the entire energy system of a country. When coal miners went on strike, it immediately halted production and ceased energy systems across Europe. This has never before been possible because never before were countries so reliant on a single source of energy. The general strike that occurred was actually almost always a key alliance between the coal workers, the dock workers, and railroad workers who moved the coal, and simply by coordinating their industrial action, this interruption to the supply of energy to an economy and to a country could be compromised. Moving forward, the introduction of oil undermined Western democracy. Coal created a mass democracy because we were dependent on such a single source of energy and countries needed to be democratic to rely on such sources. The difference with oil is that it came second. So there was a second major source of energy rather than a single dominant source, and that in itself weakens the ability of those to interrupt the energy supply. The second thing about oil is that it was largely produced elsewhere. Oil, which for geological reasons was found primarily in other parts of the world. The Middle Eastern countries, being some of the largest oil producers in the world, made them able to control many aspects of oil production and in turn control a large portion of Western democracy. Due to its unique properties and our dependency on energy, Middle Eastern countries that controlled oil production were able to monopolize the market and have control over Western democracies. For oil, there is no need for workers to manually retrieve the oil as the pressure technology brings the oil up through the well to the surface, nor are there large groups of people working together as workers to take on specialized roles of controlling the machinery. The labor force stays on the surface and is therefore under the supervision of management and of police and other forces, that they don't have the same independence as coal workers. Whereas coal workers provide a more general service, oil workers have specific tasks and are often either engineers or mechanics that specialize in a certain area of expertise. Oil workers were working side by side with management and had little room to coordinate any sort of disruption within the extraction or transportation process. Coal is ready to be used right after it is extracted. It can be transported for use right away. However, oil needs to be processed once extracted. The crude oil must be refined before it's processed after coming out of the earth. Oil is a light and fluid material that can be transported by ships or pipelines, and for the most part, oil traveled through pipes all the way up until it was loaded into tankers to be transported across the world. With so few points of contact, it became very hard for workers to halt the supply. To interrupt the supply of oil, one has to be in control at many points, such as the removal from the ground, transportation to the refineries, the refining itself, and the loading onto barges. Once the oil is seaborne, it has so many possible routes of transportation it is basically lost, and there is no chance to interrupt the delivery. That being said, in the case of oil, it is actually in the hands of the companies, not the workers. Coal made modern mass democracy possible, but powerful oil companies wanted to expand their powers into the political spirit, leading to a loss of true mass democracy. Unfortunately, these companies can interrupt supply based on what they wanted their profits to be. For example, in the Middle East, they were selling at something like 100 times the price. It may have only costed them 2 cents to produce it, but they were selling barrels for up to $2. So then you have an extraordinary system of profits based on that power of sabotage. These unionized networks help shape the kind of mass politics and energetics of democracy. Miners leveraged coal environments to get higher wages and more benefits. The coal strikes by miners allowed science and technology to shift existing power relations. However, the inability to halt oil production meant oil workers could not leverage anything to make their voices heard. And sure, there was a link between coal and the rise of mass politics, and also between oil and organizing limits to democratic politics. As we've seen today, by coal production, democracy came as a result of power struggles. Yet as our dependency on oil increased, there was a loss of democracy and a shift in international power.